A desperate single mother gives her last umbrella to a grieving stranger in the rain, unaware he is the reclusive billionaire who owns the company that just fired her. Could you dance with me? My ex is watching. The rain hammered down on the gritty pavement like 1,000 tiny, desperate fists, relentless and wild. It was a cold, biting rain that soaked through the threadbare fabric of Alara's thin coat, clinging to her weary shoulders with an unwelcome chill that mirrored the hollow ache deep within her soul. She clutched the crisp termination letter in her pocket, the paper already growing limp from the dampness, its sharp edges a cruel reminder of the sterile silence in her manager's office just an hour before. The words echoed in her mind, clinical and final, severing the last fragile thread that had kept her and her son, Leo, from falling into the abyss of true poverty. She had stood there, dignified and unflinching, as the world she had so carefully constructed splintered into a million irreparable pieces. She was alone. The biting cold seemed to seep directly into her bones, a physical manifestation of the raw fear that was beginning to coil in her stomach. The golden glow from the office buildings around her painted shimmering, distorted patterns on the wet asphalt, a mocking display of the warmth and security that was now utterly beyond her reach. She watched the sleek, polished cars glide past, their occupants cocooned in a world of dry leather and soft music, oblivious to the fragile figure trembling on the corner. A quiet sob caught in her throat, but she swallowed it down with the practiced resolve of a mother who could not afford the luxury of breaking. Leo was waiting. He needed his medicine, and he needed her to be strong. The thought of his small, innocent face, so trusting and so dependent on her, was the only anchor in this swirling vortex of despair. It was for him she would endure this. For him she would find a way. She had to. A sputtering cough from a nearby alleyway broke through the monotonous drumming of the rain, drawing her gaze. A man stood beside a stalled, unremarkable sedan, its hood propped open uselessly as steam hissed into the deluge. He was drenched, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, and his suit, though clearly expensive, was soaked and ruined. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were haunted, filled with a profound, unspoken emptiness that seemed to absorb the flickering light of the street lamp above, giving nothing back. He wasn't just a man caught in the rain. He was a man drowning in a storm of his own, one far more brutal than the one lashing the city. She saw in his gaunt features a reflection of her own shattered state, a kinship of suffering that transcended their vastly different circumstances. He looked lost. For a fleeting moment, Alara hesitated, her own desperate situation screaming at her to keep walking, to hoard the little she had left. She had her son's precious medicine in her bag, tucked inside a plastic folder, and the small, worn umbrella clutched in her hand was the only thing protecting it. The last $20 in her wallet was meant for Leo's special formula, a meager sum that now felt like a fortune. But then she looked at the man again, at the way his shoulders slumped in defeat, and her own pain receded, replaced by a surge of pure, selfless compassion. Her heart, though broken, still knew how to feel for another. This man was a stranger, yet his sorrow was a language she understood perfectly. She walked towards him, her worn shoes squelching softly on the saturated ground. The rhythmic sound was a quiet testament to her own hardship, yet she moved with a steady, unwavering purpose that belied the trembling in her hands. He didn't seem to notice her until she was standing right beside him, holding out the small, faded blue umbrella. He blinked, rainwater dripping from his eyelashes, his hollow eyes slowly focusing on her face as if seeing a ghost. The umbrella was her shield, her only protection. She was offering it to him. "Here," she said, her voice gentle but clear above the storm. "You need this more than I do." He stared at the umbrella, then back at her, a flicker of disbelief crossing his features. He saw her threadbare coat, her pale face, the quiet dignity in her posture. He saw a woman who had nothing, offering him her only shelter. He opened his mouth to refuse, to say something, but no words came. It was as if his voice had been stolen by the sheer, unexpected purity of the gesture. In his world, every action was transactional, every kindness a calculated investment. This was something else entirely. It was sincere. Alara pushed the umbrella into his hand, her cold fingers briefly brushing against his. The contact was brief, but it sent a strange warmth through her, a small spark in the overwhelming cold. She then reached into her wallet, pulled out the crumpled $20 bill, and pressed that into his other hand. "For a taxi," she explained simply, before he could protest. "Your car seems to be finished for the night." This second act of kindness seemed to shatter something within him. He gasped, a short, sharp intake of breath that was lost in the wind. He looked at the money in his hand, then at her, his expression a mixture of awe and profound confusion. He was Adrian Sterling, a man who measured his worth in billions, a man whose name was etched onto the very buildings that surrounded them, and he was being offered $20 by a woman who looked like she hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. He hadn't felt a genuine human connection in 5 years, not since the accident that had stolen his wife and daughter and plunged his world into a sterile silence. This woman, this stranger, had just punched a hole through the thick wall of ice he had built around his heart. He couldn't speak. Before he could find his voice, she gave him a small, sad smile that was one of the most beautiful things he had ever seen. "Stay safe," she whispered, and then she turned and walked away, pulling her thin coat tighter around herself and disappearing into the pounding rain. He stood frozen, the worn wooden handle of the umbrella in one hand and the crisp bill in the other. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this small, selfless act in the middle of a storm, would change everything. She was gone. Adrian remained motionless for a long time, the rain forgotten, the cold unnoticed. The worn umbrella felt impossibly heavy in his hand, a sacred object, a testament to a kind of grace he had thought no longer existed in the world. He looked down at the $20 bill, the face of Andrew Jackson staring up at him, and a raw, unfamiliar emotion swelled in his chest. It was a painful, cathartic sensation, like a frozen river finally beginning to crack and flow again. For 5 years, he had been a ghost haunting his own life, moving through cavernous rooms and sterile boardrooms, his heart a hollow chamber of grief. He had surrounded himself with immense, gleaming wealth, but it was a cold comfort, a polished monument to his unbearable loss. This woman, with her gentle eyes and selfless gesture, had done what no therapist or well-meaning friend had been able to do. She had made him feel something again. He finally moved, his actions slow and deliberate. He closed the hood of his car, a simple, anonymous vehicle he sometimes used to escape his gilded cage, and got inside, the engine starting with a reluctant grumble. He didn't drive home. Instead, he drove to the nearest corner, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, and called Arthur, the head of his personal security and his oldest, most trusted confidant. The line clicked, and Arthur's calm, steady voice answered. "Sir, is everything all right?" Adrian's own voice was hoarse when he spoke, cracked with an emotion he couldn't name. "Arthur, I need you to find someone." He described her in painstaking detail. The threadbare coat, the pale, determined face, the quiet dignity in her eyes, and the faded blue umbrella. He told Arthur the entire story, the words tumbling out of him, his usual commanding tone replaced by something raw and vulnerable. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Arthur had been with him since before the tragedy, had watched him retreat from the world and become a brittle shell of his former self. He understood the seismic shift that was occurring. "I'll find her, Adrian," Arthur promised, his voice soft with an unspoken understanding. "I'll find her." Meanwhile, Alara arrived back at her small, cramped apartment, the biting cold having settled deep into her bones. The journey home without the umbrella had been miserable, and a persistent shiver racked her fragile frame. Her first thought, as always, was for Leo. She checked the medicine in her bag, relief washing over her as she saw the plastic folder had mostly protected it from the deluge. Leo was asleep in his crib, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, a soft flush on his cheeks from a low-grade fever that never seemed to fully break. He was her entire world, the single golden glow in her increasingly dark life. She watched him for a moment, her heart clenching with a fierce, protective love that was almost painful in its intensity. She would not fail him. A sharp knock on the door made her jump. It was her landlord, Mr. Henderson, a man whose face seemed permanently etched into a scowl. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He held out a white envelope, his eyes cold and impatient. It was a final eviction notice. The sight of it made the floor feel as though it had dropped out from under her. She had been late with the rent before, but she had always managed to scrape it together. Now, jobless and with only a few coins left to her name, there was no hope. Desperation, cold and sharp, pierced through her resolve. She took the notice with a trembling hand, the paper feeling as heavy as a death sentence. "You have 2 weeks, Alara," he said, his voice flat and devoid of sympathy. "Then you're out. I'm not running a charity." The soft click of her door closing echoed the finality of his words. Total silence. The next few days were a blur of quiet, dignified desperation. Alara sold what little she had of value. A small locket from her grandmother, a few books, her old laptop. It wasn't much, but it was enough for food and another bottle of Leo's formula. She spent every waking hour searching for work, sending out applications to cafes, diners, and cleaning services, her resume a testament to the administrative skills that were now useless without a reference from her last job. Each rejection was a small, sharp blow, chipping away at her dwindling hope. She ate little, ensuring every decent bite of food went to Leo, and her already slender frame grew more gaunt, her eyes more hollow. Yet, she never let her son see her despair. For him, she manufactured smiles and sang soft lullabies, her voice a steady, gentle presence in their uncertain world. Unbeknownst to her, a powerful, unseen force was already in motion. Arthur's team, with the vast resources of Sterling Industries at their disposal, had found her within 48 hours. They had cross-referenced security footage from the area with employee records, and a match had been made. When Arthur presented the file to Adrian, the information it contained sent a jolt through him. Alara Vance, a former junior accountant at Sterling Corp., his own company, fired 2 days ago for departmental restructuring. A cold, corporate euphemism he knew was often used to cover for petty managerial disputes. Her employee file was impeccable, filled with glowing performance reviews. And her son, Leo, was suffering from a rare respiratory condition that required expensive, ongoing treatment. A cold, commanding anger rose in Adrian, an emotion he hadn't felt in years. His company, the one he had built, had cast this woman out. This pure, selfless woman who had given him her last $20. It was an unbearable stain on his honor. He immediately ordered a full, confidential investigation into her dismissal. But that was a matter of justice. The more immediate issue was her suffering. He would not allow it to continue for another second. The first miracle arrived in a crisp, unmarked envelope slid under her door. Inside was a cashier's check for a sum large enough to cover her rent for an entire year. There was no note, no explanation. Alara stared at it, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind reeling with disbelief. She thought it had to be a mistake, a cruel prank. But when the bank confirmed its legitimacy, a sob of pure, cathartic relief escaped her lips. She sank to her knees on the worn linoleum floor, clutching the check to her chest as tears streamed down her face. It was a reprieve, a breath of air when she was certain she was about to drown. More anonymous acts of kindness followed. A delivery service, claiming to be from a local food bank charity, began leaving boxes of gourmet groceries and Leo's expensive formula at her doorstep each week. Then, a letter arrived from a prestigious pediatric specialist, informing her that an anonymous benefactor had established a grant to cover all of Leo's medical expenses, effective immediately. The world, which had been so cruel and unforgiving, suddenly seemed to be filled with a soft, gentle magic. Alara felt a profound sense of gratitude, but also a deep, unsettling mystery. Who was doing this? Who was this hidden savior watching over her? She never once connected these blessings to the haunted-eyed stranger in the rain. That encounter felt like a dream, a fleeting moment of human connection in a storm, now lost to the past. He had vanished, A month later, a call came from Sarah, a former colleague from Sterling Corporation. Her voice was laced with guilt. "Alara, I know this is last minute," she began, "but it's the annual Sterling Charity Gala tomorrow night. My +1 canceled, and I just feel so awful about what happened. I thought maybe you'd like a night out, a chance to feel normal again." Alara's first instinct was to refuse. A glittering gala was a world away from her reality of diapers and job applications. It was the world that had chewed her up and spit her out. But then she thought about the unrelenting grayness of her days. The idea of putting on a dress, of hearing music, of being an adult among other adults for just one night, was an undeniable temptation. "I'd love to," she heard herself say, a decision that would unknowingly set her on a collision course with her destiny. She found a simple, elegant navy blue dress at a second-hand store, a graceful garment that shimmered faintly under the light. It was a stark contrast to the ornate designer gowns she knew would fill the room, but it made her feel beautiful, dignified. When she looked in the mirror, she saw not a desperate, unemployed single mother, but a woman with quiet strength and unwavering resolve. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. The gala was held in the cavernous, polished marble ballroom of the city's most stately hotel. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the soft hush of polite conversation, punctuated by the clinking of crystal glasses. Golden light from ornate chandeliers bathed the room in an amber hue, making everything and everyone look impossibly glamorous. Alara felt a wave of intimidation, a feeling of being an imposter in a world she did not belong to. She clung to Sarah, navigating the sea of crisp tuxedos and gleaming jewels. And then she saw him. Her ex-husband, Mark, stood across the room, a smug, self-satisfied smile on his face. On his arm was his new fiancée, Isabella, a woman who dripped with diamonds and disdain. It was Mark who had left her when Leo was first diagnosed, unable to handle the burden of a sick child. He had called her weak, a drain on his ambitions. Seeing him now, so successful and carefree, was like a physical blow. Their eyes met across the room. A cruel, mocking smirk spread across his face. He and Isabella began walking towards her, their expressions predatory. Panic seized her. She couldn't face them, not here, not now. She had to escape. She turned, desperate for a way out, and her eyes landed on a solitary figure standing near the glass doors that led to a terrace. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored tuxedo, his back partially to the room as he stared out at the city lights. There was something familiar about his stillness, his isolation in the midst of the crowd. In that moment of pure desperation, she didn't think. She just acted. She walked straight to him, her heart thudding wildly in her chest. She reached his side, and he turned at her approach. His face was no longer gaunt, but it held the same haunted quality she remembered, the same profound sadness in his deep, steady eyes. It was him, the man from the storm. Her breath caught in her throat. He looked at her, and she saw a flash of recognition, a seismic shock that registered deep in his gaze before his expression smoothed into a polite, questioning neutrality. She didn't have time to process the impossibility of it. Mark and Isabella were getting closer. "Could you dance with me?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "My ex is watching." Adrian's world tilted on its axis. He had dreamed of this moment, of seeing her again, but he had imagined it differently. He had planned to approach her carefully, to explain himself. Not this, not a desperate plea in the middle of a crowded ballroom. He saw the panic in her glistening eyes, saw the two figures approaching with undisguised malice. Without a word, he nodded. He extended a hand, and as her fingers touched his, a jolt of electricity, warm and undeniable, passed between them. He gently pulled her onto the dance floor just as the orchestra swelled into a slow, tender waltz. He placed one hand on the small of her back, the fabric of her simple dress soft beneath his palm. He held her other hand in his grip firm and protective. They began to move, their bodies fitting together with an ease that felt both new and ancient. Alara's panic slowly began to subside, replaced by a sense of surreal safety in this stranger's arms. She could feel Mark's furious gaze burning into her back, but it no longer mattered. In the circle of this man's embrace, she felt shielded, seen. The world outside of them seemed to melt away into a soft, blurry haze. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice barely audible over the music. "You have no idea what you just saved me from." "I think I might have some idea," he replied, his voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated through her. "Some people thrive on the cruelty they can inflict on others." She looked up at him properly then, into those searching, haunted eyes. The man from the rain had been a shadow, a fleeting impression of sorrow. This man was solid, real, and possessed a quiet, commanding presence that was both intimidating and deeply reassuring. He moved with a grace and confidence that spoke of immense power held in careful reserve. Who was he? The question burned in her mind. "I never got to thank you," he said softly, his gaze unwavering. "For the umbrella. And the money." Alara froze mid-step. He remembered. The realization was a shock, sending a fresh wave of heat through her. You're the man from the storm," she stammered, feeling foolishly obvious. A small, sad smile touched his lips, the same one she remembered. "I am. You disappeared before I could even ask your name." "It's Alara," she said, her voice regaining some of its steadiness. "Alara," he repeated, the name sounding like a sacred word on his tongue. "It's beautiful." Adam, the lie came easily. He wasn't ready to drop the weight of the sterling name on her. Not yet. He wanted this moment, this connection, to be pure, untainted by his wealth and status. The music ended, but they didn't move apart. The soft hush of the ballroom returned, but they remained in their own silent bubble. He led her away from the dance floor, towards a quiet, secluded alcove near the terrace doors, a small, dimly lit space away from prying eyes. He procured 2 glasses of water from a passing waiter and handed one to her. It was a simple, thoughtful gesture. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the unspoken questions hanging in the air between them. "You seem to be a woman who makes a habit of rescuing strangers," he finally said, his eyes searching her face in the amber hue of the decorative lamps. She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Hardly. That night, I don't know. You looked like you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. I suppose I recognized the feeling." His expression softened, a raw vulnerability showing through his carefully constructed facade. "I was," he admitted. "I still am, most days." This was the beginning of their confession. In that quiet, safe space, the carefully built walls around their hearts began to crumble. He spoke first, his voice low and heavy with memory. He told her about a life he once had, a life filled with laughter and light. He spoke of a wife with a smile that could chase away any shadow and a daughter with eyes like the summer sky. He didn't mention their names or the details of the car accident, but he painted a vivid portrait of his loss, of the sterile silence that had followed. A silence so profound he thought it would swallow him whole. He spoke of a grief so unbearable it had hollowed him out, leaving him a ghost in his own stately life. Alara listened, her heart aching with a deep, sincere empathy. She didn't offer empty platitudes or tell him it would get better. She simply listened, her steady, unwavering gaze making him feel truly seen for the first time in 5 years. She saw not the powerful man in the tuxedo, but the shattered soul beneath. When he finished, his voice thick with unshed tears, she didn't say anything. Instead, she reached out and gently placed her hand on his arm. A simple, tender gesture of shared humanity. The warmth of her touch seemed to anchor him, to pull him back from the edge of his sorrow. Then it was her turn. She told him about Leo, about his illness, about the fierce, all-consuming love she had for her son. She spoke of her struggles, of being fired, of the desperation and the fear. But she didn't speak with self-pity. She spoke with a quiet, dignified resolve that took his breath away. She told him about the mysterious checks, the anonymous grants, the miracles that had saved her. "I feel like I have a guardian angel," she confessed, a small, wondering smile on her face. "Someone I can never thank." Adrian's heart clenched. He wanted to tell her everything, to confess that he was the source of her miracles, that her one small act of kindness had reawakened his heart and given him a new purpose. But the words wouldn't come. It wasn't the right time. The secret felt too large, too fragile. He was afraid it would shatter the pure, delicate connection they were forging in that moment, a bond built not on gratitude or obligation, but on a shared understanding of grief and resilience. The bond was sacred. As the evening wore on, they talked for what felt like hours, their conversation a lifeline in the crowded room. They discovered a shared love for old books and rainy days, a similar sense of humor, a mutual belief in the quiet power of kindness. For Alara, it was a revelation. She was talking to a man who understood her without needing lengthy explanations. For Adrian, it was a rebirth. He was laughing, truly laughing, for the first time since the accident. Her presence was like a warm, golden glow, pushing back the heavy fog of his grief. But the night couldn't last forever. The gala was winding down, the crowd beginning to thin. Their shared bubble of intimacy was about to burst. Suddenly, their quiet alcove was invaded. Isabella, her face a mask of condescending fury, stood before them, with Mark lurking just behind her. The abrupt intrusion shattered the tender atmosphere. "Well, well?" Isabella sneered, her voice dripping with venom as her eyes raked over Alara's simple dress. "Look what we have here. I should have known you'd find a way to slither in here, Alara. Did you come to beg for scraps from your old bosses?" Alara stiffened, her face paling. Adrian's hand, which was still resting on her arm, tightened protectively. He stood up a little straighter, his calm demeanor shifting into something colder, more commanding. He watched, his eyes like chips of ice, waiting. This was the moment the foil was designed for. Mark stepped forward, his expression a mixture of contempt and embarrassment. "Honestly, Alara, this is pathetic. You don't belong here. Go home to your situation. You're making a scene." The public humiliation had begun. People nearby were starting to turn, their curiosity piqued by the raised voices. Alara felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, and a hot flush of shame crept up her neck. She remained dignified, her chin held high, but her hands were trembling. She was overwhelmed, but she would not let them see her break. "I was invited," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Isabella let out a shrill, cruel laugh. "Invited? Or did you follow this poor man in here?" She gestured dismissively at Adrian. "Hoping he'd take pity on you? Let me give you some advice. Men like this," she gestured around the opulent ballroom, "they don't want baggage, they want class. Something you know nothing about." The words were like sharp, poisoned darts. Each one found its mark. Alara winced, her resolve faltering. She felt small, exposed, and utterly alone. She was about to turn and flee, to run from the stares and the whispers, when Adrian moved. He stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of her, a silent, immovable shield. His entrance was not loud or flashy, but the entire atmosphere shifted around him. His presence was suddenly immense, commanding, drawing all the light and air in the room towards him. A hush fell over the immediate area as people recognized the calm but powerful aura of a man who was used to being in charge. He looked not at Alara, but directly at Isabella, his eyes cold and unwavering. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it cut through the murmuring like polished steel. "You are mistaken," he said, the words perfectly articulated. "I am the one who is honored by her presence tonight." Isabella scoffed, emboldened by her ignorance of who he was. "Oh, please, don't tell me you've fallen for her little charity case act. This woman is a professional victim." Adrian's expression didn't change, but a dangerous stillness settled over him. This was the moment of revelation. "My name," he said, his voice dropping to a level that was both intimate and projected across the silent crowd, "is Adrian Sterling." A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. The name landed with the force of a physical blow. Mark's face went white, a sickly, pale shade of horror. Isabella's jaw dropped, her perfectly painted red lips forming a silent O of disbelief. They had just publicly humiliated a woman who was standing beside the reclusive, legendary billionaire who owned the entire company, the man whose name was on the very building they stood in. They had made a catastrophic mistake. Adrian was not finished. He turned his attention to the wider audience, his voice rising with controlled, righteous anger. This woman, Ilara Vance, whom you see fit to judge in her simple dress, possesses more character, more integrity, and more pure human decency than anyone I have ever had the privilege of meeting. His powerful monologue had begun. He continued, his gaze sweeping over the silent, captivated crowd before landing back on Mark and Isabella. A month ago, I was a stranger standing in a storm, my car broken down, soaked to the bone. I was a man who had forgotten what kindness looked like. This woman, who I now know had just been unjustly fired from my own company, who had a sick child at home and barely $1 to her name, walked up to me without a moment's hesitation. His voice grew thick with emotion. She gave me her only umbrella. She gave me her last $20 for a taxi. She asked for nothing in return. She simply saw a person in need and acted with a selfless grace that I thought had vanished from this world. The story hung in the air, beautiful and shocking in its simplicity. The power dynamic had not just been reversed, it had been utterly annihilated. Ilara stared at him, tears glistening in her eyes, a mixture of disbelief and profound gratitude washing over her. He was defending her. He was telling her story. So you see, Adrian concluded, his voice now a low, menacing growl directed squarely at the two frozen figures before him. She is not the one who does not belong here. You are. He then turned his back on them completely, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and faced the stunned event organizer. As a new addition to this evening's auction, he announced, his voice ringing with authority, I will be personally funding the construction of a new, state-of-the-art pediatric wing for the city hospital. It will be named the Ilara and Leo Vance Wing for Compassionate Care. Total silence. The announcement was a thunderclap, a grand, public declaration of his protection and admiration. He had not only saved her from humiliation, he had elevated her, honored her, and immortalized her act of kindness in the most permanent way imaginable. He then turned back to Ilara, his eyes now soft and filled with a tender, unspoken emotion. He gently took her hand. Let's get you home, he whispered, for her ears only. He led her through the stunned, parting crowd, leaving Mark and Isabella speechless and utterly ruined in his wake. He was her savior. The ride home in Adrian's sleek, silent car was thick with a sacred, unspoken tension. The city lights blurred into long streaks of gold and white as the vehicle glided through the rain-slicked streets. Ilara sat in the plush leather seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her mind struggling to process the seismic events of the evening. The man beside her, the quiet stranger from the storm, the gentle dance partner, was Adrian Sterling, the reclusive billionaire, her former boss, her hidden savior, the architect of all the miracles that had kept her afloat. The sheer scale of it was almost too much to comprehend. Her heart thudded wildly against her ribs, a frantic, unsteady rhythm of shock and dawning hope. Adrian drove, his focus seemingly on the road, but Ilara could feel the weight of his gaze on her. He pulled the car to a stop not in front of her modest apartment building, but on a quiet, tree-lined street overlooking a park, the rain creating a soft, percussive rhythm on the roof. He turned off the engine, and the world outside vanished, leaving them cocooned in a bubble of profound, intimate silence. He finally turned to face her, his expression raw and open, all pretense stripped away. Ilara, he began, his voice low and laced with a deep, resonant sincerity. I know this is a lot to take in. I should have told you who I was sooner. I'm sorry. She shook her head, finding her voice at last. The rent, she whispered, her eyes wide with dawning realization. The groceries, Leo's doctors. That was all you. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. Yes, after that night in the rain, I had to find you. When I discovered what my own company had done to you, I was furious. But more than that, I was moved. Your kindness, Alara. It was like a light turning on in a room that had been dark for 5 years. You showed me there was still goodness in the world, still something worth fighting for. You saved me long before I ever did anything for you. Tears she hadn't even realized she was holding back began to slip down her cheeks, hot and cathartic. They weren't tears of sadness or shame, but of overwhelming, unbelievable relief. All this time, she had felt so alone, fighting a desperate, solitary battle. To know that someone had been there, watching over her, protecting her, was an unbearable, beautiful weight lifted from her soul. Why? She asked, the single word encompassing 1,000 questions. Why would you do all of that for a stranger? He reached across the space between them, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. His touch was electric, yet incredibly tender. Because you weren't a stranger, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. In that one moment, when you gave me everything you had left, you became the most important person in the world to me. I've spent the last month watching you from a distance, seeing your strength, your resilience, your unwavering love for your son. I wasn't just repaying a debt, Alara. I was falling in love with you. The confession hung in the air between them, more stunning than any of the evening's other revelations. He loved her. This powerful, broken, beautiful man loved her. Her own feelings, a confusing mix of gratitude, admiration, and a deep, undeniable attraction, coalesced into a single, shining point of truth. She loved him, too. She loved the haunted man in the rain and the commanding CEO at the gala. They were the same person, and her heart recognized his soul. She started, but the words wouldn't form. A sob of pure, unadulterated joy caught in her throat. He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers, his warm breath mingling with her own. You don't have to say anything, he whispered. Just let me take care of you. Let me take care of you and Leo. Let me give you the safety and security you deserve. Let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the kindness you showed a stranger in a storm. He pulled back just enough to look into her glistening eyes, asking a silent question. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of complete surrender and trust. And then he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of profound tenderness and release. It was a promise of quiet mornings and shared laughter, of nightmares chased away and futures rebuilt. It was the gentle joining of two shattered souls who had, against all odds, found a way to make each other whole again. It was a cathartic, undeniable seal on their new beginning. The rain had stopped. 1 year later, the golden afternoon sun cast long, soft shadows across the immaculate lawns of a stately, sprawling garden. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming roses and freshly cut grass. A small boy with bright, curious eyes and cheeks glowing with health chased a butterfly across the grass, his delighted laughter echoing in the soft hush of the idyllic afternoon. This was Leo, no longer fragile, but a vibrant, thriving child. Watching him from a blanket spread under the shade of a massive oak tree were Alara and Adrian. Alara was radiant, the hollow, haunted look in her eyes replaced by a deep, serene happiness. The threadbare coat was a distant memory, replaced by a simple, elegant sundress, but the real change was internal. She was no longer just surviving. She was flourishing. Adrian sat beside her, his arm wrapped securely around her. The profound grief that had once defined him had receded, leaving behind a quiet strength and a love for his new family that was visible in his every glance, his every touch. His eyes, once empty, were now filled with an unwavering adoration for the woman and child who had saved him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I have something for you," he said, his voice soft. Inside was a gleaming silver locket. He opened it to reveal two tiny, perfect photographs. On one side was a smiling picture of him and Alara, taken just a week before. On the other was a picture of Leo, his face lit up with pure joy. It was a symbol of their family, of the new life they had built together from the ashes of their past sorrows. Alara gasped, her fingers tracing the cool metal. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her eyes shimmering with happy tears. "It's our story," he corrected gently. He took the locket and fastened it around her neck, his fingers warm against her skin. A reminder that even in the darkest storm, the smallest light, the most selfless act, can lead to a miracle. Leo, abandoning his butterfly chase, came running to them, tumbling into their laps in a heap of giggles. Adrian scooped him up, holding him tight, and Alara leaned in, resting her head on Adrian's shoulder. They sat there for a long time, a perfect portrait of a family, bathed in the warm, golden glow of the afternoon. The silence was not empty or sterile. It was full, rich, and brimming with unspoken love and the promise of 1,000 happy tomorrows. They were home. This story is a testament to the idea that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the capacity of the human heart for kindness. It is a fable of redemption, showing us that even the most shattered souls can be healed by a single, selfless act of compassion. Alara's simple gift of an umbrella did more than shield a stranger from the rain. It pierced through years of grief and cynicism, reminding a powerful man of his own humanity and giving them both a second chance at a life filled with love and security. If the story touched your heart, and you believe in the power of love to overcome even the greatest of hardships, please let us know. These tales are meant to be a beacon of hope, a reminder that goodness exists in the world, often in the most unexpected places. Your engagement helps us continue to share these messages of light and redemption with the world. We invite you to like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales for more soul-stirring stories of connection and healing. Join our community and help us spread these heartwarming narratives that celebrate the enduring strength of the human spirit. We'll see you in the next one.